So just to basically give you some context, so in the late fall of 2013, the provost appointed me to be the inaugural director of, at that time it was unnamed, so she wanted to create an umbrella program to basically bring together all of the women in STEM efforts at Boston University. And as you can see, what I have down here we had the Women in Science and Engineering, which was a ground roots kind of buildup of faculty from which the GWISE spawned, the Graduate Women in Science and Engineering. We had WISE Up, which was actually, it later became a living group where you would have housing for all women in STEM, and also WISE at Warren. Warren Towers is one of, if you've been to Boston University, it's one of our oldest dorms, but that was a floor dedicated for science and engineering. And we also had some outreach, Artemis and Summer Pathways. So the goal she asked me to do was to bring a level of inclusiveness in STEM, but then also support women in STEM at all levels. So it required kind of doing a cataloging of all the efforts that were going on campus, getting a website, also naming the effort, right, and then also finding where we had areas that we needed to fill in as well. So actually, if I go back a second, so ARROWS is what I ended up calling it, which stands for, I like action words a lot, so it's Advance, Recruit, Retain, and Organize Women in STEM. And so, but let me tell you the process on how we came about this. So when I first started, right, the question you had to ask is, how do you engage the entire institution, right? So you have, again, this was great because it was coming top down from the provost. You need both top down and bottom up. We had already had the bottom up from the WISE, right? And as I told you, also, at the graduate and undergraduate level to a certain extent. But you want the deans on board and the chairs, all your faculty, right? You may have some obstructive, well, not meaningly so, but you might have some faculty that are maybe, let's say, challenging, and staff and also students. And so the other point is there's so many different strategies. Do you teach people? Do you educate them? Do you incentivize with money? Do you set quotas? And there were a lot of really fantastic examples, that I've learned a lot from, many different countries. And the question is what are the different approaches you can do? And so what also happened so this was now in the timeline, so now we fast forward to August 2014, so we're still kind of, the name had been set, and so just fortuitously, this is a friend of mine from college, Bublu Thakur Weigold, and so she just happened to be in town, and she wanted me to meet her daughters and kind of tell her what kind of research I was doing, and then, when you're chatting, I said, oh, so what have you been doing? I hadn't seen her in like 20 years. I said, what have you been doing over the last 20 years? And so what she told me is she was using project management tools to change cultures in businesses, right? And so at this time, very heavy on my mind was ARROWS. And so I just asked her, and I also knew we were at MIT together as undergraduates, and in an all-women living house, it's Women's Independent Living Group. It kind of sounds like a political organization, but it wasn't. It was basically a co-op where some of my best friends are there. And that's another theme I want to say, the importance of community. So at the time, there at MIT, there was I think probably only 20% women. This was in the 80s. And so for me, coming back from my classes, I had surrounded, basically a house full of women. So for me, I was in my little bubble, if you will. And she was also studying project management, but she also was basically student zero of MIT's women's studies program. And so for her, I asked her, I said, have you used your project tools? That she actually created a tool set, right, where trained as scientists and engineers from Joe Raylan's, seminal paper of using action learning to promote collaborative research. And so I asked her, I said, could we use your project management tools for this gender equity problem? And so she looked at me and she said, she was thinking of these issues, 30 years ago, and she was looking at her two daughters and said, I don't know, but let's try it. And so I'm going to walk you through the process that we did, where these are the tools she described to me in general, kind of the approach that she had done in these companies. So the point is you have to first develop this vision to drive organizational change in an organized way. So you then work backwards from the vision, and you have what I really like here, you you have accelerators. Like, who are your accelerators? They can be people, they can be different policies, but you also have barriers, right? And hopefully you can change those barriers into accelerators. And then the point is you don't cluster everything all at the same time. You like to have different key processes or deliverables in a timeline, and then you're constantly evaluating. But this is a great way to basically have a roadmap. And so just to walk you through that, before we had to do this, she explained to me, so I have to explain to you, I was trained as a material scientist, right? So when she said MOU, I'm like, what? So memorandum of understanding, she said, it's very important to then scope out what your focus is, right? Because you can imagine when I was appointed this position, I started getting emails from everybody, right? And I could have, just answered everything, but then, you can then burn out, right? So she said, it's really important to develop this MOU. And so basically the processes are, problem statement with data. Why is it important to solve the problem? What are some possible root causes and the hypotheses for them? And then ultimately the project objectives, and then this forms the basis of the roadmap. And so this MOU, which I had to think a lot about, and in fact it took, because it took really a year to really think about and also engage my colleagues in this to think about it. So one thing I think everyone in the room agrees on, there's just too few, right? There, especially women in STEM faculty, especially at the full professor level, then let alone department chairs, associate deans, and deans. And this was really unclear for us too. What is really required for promotion from associate to full professor? I think a lot of institutions, including ours, do a pretty good job in getting you tenure, right? But then it's kind of like, oh, at least in my case, it was like, well, yeah, it'll happen, right? You just kind of like forget about, let's say, the associate professors, but that's a problem because a lot of these leadership positions require you to be full professor, right? And the other point is that it's too uniform, and just thinking like from an engineering, design perspective, you don't have diversity of thought, right? So then it's very difficult without diversity of thought to solve complex problems and high impact problems, right? So, and then the other point is that you would really like to raise your institution's visibility as an institution of excellence and attract, the best talent. And so what we, just to also give you some context, so at Boston University, currently we have about 400 faculty, men and women, in STEM, and about a little over 20% of them are women. But if you look at the full professor level, this is just an example. As Shirley mentioned, you really have to look at the discipline. I'm only showing you physics here, but this was the state of the art. So this was like in the fall of 2015. This was anticipated academic year 2016. But this shows you for physics, and actually the reason why I have this too is because where's Carl? Carl Ludwig, our chair. Yeah, there he is. So our chair of physics is sitting in the back there. But so you can see at the full professor level in the College of Engineering, only 10% of our faculty are full professor women. And it's a little bit higher in College of Arts and Sciences at about 17%. But this gives you the numbers. This is the National Science Foundation numbers here, which is great that we have this. Again, this was something that I think, as Shirley said, that because of the workshop at AAAS, it forced legislation from Senator Kennedy that actually gave us this data and showing us what the pool is, right? You can see for physics, it's not particularly good, right? And so there are definitely opportunities, right, to intervene here. But then this shows you the assistant, associate, and full professor numbers, right? Just to give you a context of where we were at. And so in the important thing, we decided, rather to make it a positive, right? And so of course, it's important to have justice, right? And fairness, but really, we felt we could engage the most people to say, wait, nobody will argue with you if you say you want to retain the best talent, right? Everyone wants to be competitive, right? And so this would be uniformly important to all stakeholders. And so the question is why is it important to solve this problem today, right? As the last talk before the coffee break, the problem, it will not solve itself, right? So what is the cost of actually doing nothing, right? So it actually does matter. You have to do some action. And so in terms of the possible root causes, here's some cultural effects, and I have just anecdotally, I have observed this, in fact, even with myself. Women may perceive themselves as not quite ready or qualified for promotion. You may have heard of the study where, if there's a job application and there's different qualifications, a woman will say, yeah, I can only do maybe 70% of the things, I'm not going to apply. But a male, again, this is gross generalization, but male will say, oh yeah, I can do about half of it. Okay, I'm going to apply. And so that's one thing. That women tend not to self-promote themselves because they believe the science will speak for itself. Sometimes they're even penalized for self-promoting as well. Women may suffer from unintentional bias from men and women, right? So that's the implicit bias. And so the question is what do we want to do at the institution, right? You want to ensure consistency, documentation, transparency, and widely shared processes. So this is not only at the faculty search and selection level, but also promotion to full professor level. And so we'd like to collect data to determine these root causes. What are some hypotheses for this? We've already heard about the leaky pipeline. I already mentioned that professors may feel they're not ready or qualified, and I already mentioned that leadership positions often require this full professor rank, right? And so as I already showed you, those numbers are quite small of the pool, right? So we really have a lot against us, even though we are a majority, right, of the population, right? And so what the objectives we finally decided on was we wanted to assure, again, focusing on the best talent, right? How can we at least, at the minimum, match the pool, right? Because I showed you for physics, we're doing quite better in biomedical engineering, for example, right? So how can we at least match the pool? And then we want to increase the number of at least at Boston University, the STEM women in leadership positions, right? And then increase these numbers as well. And of course, you then have to have these metrics where you want to increase the faculty, and then another idea, too, is actually comparing the data, how long it takes people to go from full professor before and after we do this policy implementation. And so what we decided to do, so at this point we had a name, we had an MOU, right? And so we're ready. So we decided to invite the stakeholders. So these, I selected a group of associate and full professors in women in STEM for the reason of tapping this collective intelligence, right? And so we had this design workshop focused on 3 key processes that we generally said we want: career plans, sponsorship, which we have said it's different, as Deborah said, sponsorship is very different from mentorship. Sponsorship opens doors for you, makes things happen, and faculty hiring process as well. So this was the group. Actually, this is after we had our roadmap, so this was an after, but let me tell you how we got there. This was the provost who came and celebrated with us, and this is, us all very happy. But this is what we basically, just to give you a snapshot, this is a faculty hiring roadmap. So again, the workshop we did in August 2015, this might be hard for you to read, so I'll tell you here, is we want to achieve departmental gender goals based on the pool and target satisfaction ratings by 2020, right? So this just shows you, here are our accelerators. We have buy-in from the top. We have quality staff support, like that this would be an accelerator. But here are the barriers. Do you have resistance from key stakeholders? Who actually will, the devil's in the details, right? Who's actually going to do the training? And like I said, you may have some obstructionist faculty as well. And so some of the ideas, I don't have everything on here, but just to show you some ideas. So you wanted to secure commitment from the deans. One thing we thought was really important was to create, at the time we were using the University of Wisconsin Guide to Faculty Hiring, which is fantastic, but I don't know if you've seen it, it's a really thick book, and a lot of people found that hard to wade through. So we thought one of the things to do early on was to basically make this abridged and put the high points in, and then create a packet of hiring materials. And then this is again where we're seeing and you constantly evaluate. So this is our one example roadmap, and so we had them for each of these. And just to tell you about the progress tracking a little bit, so you have the task, the owner, this is really actually very important. Who's going to own the task and do this, right? And then what is the due date? Who actually sponsors it and approves it? And then the status, and then the comments, right? And so just to give you some examples for each one. So this is a career planning. We had these Arrows lunches with leaders. It's important, I think, to give credit. The BU WISE program actually first introduced this program of lunches with leaders. So this is actually a lunch we had with a provost. And this was fantastic because she was quite candid and told us her story basically on how she came to become provost, because that basically demystifies it for people, right? And so the other thing I just really want to highlight is this associate to full professor workshop. Again, what's really remarkable to me, right? The College of Arts and Sciences in the fall of 2016, they basically, so last fall, the first ever workshop for associate to full. And the engineering, we're 50 years old, our College of Engineering, but to be fair, we were very recently, in terms of research, but this was also our first ever workshop. And then it involved having university promotion and tenure committee panelists talking about what they felt was important. And then what was important, we added this follow-up CV workshop where you would actually have associate professors, and we just had one last week, and we're going to have one in another week. And so the idea is to have this owned by the College of Faculty Actions. And then we also have media training. How do you get your message out, right? So we leveraged our BU Public Relations Office, and BU is fortunate to be working with the Alan Alda Center. Many of you may know it's a communicating science center. We also have this abridged faculty hiring guide. Unconscious bias training, very interestingly, we had this by electrical and computer engineering. They invited the Cornell Theater Troupe that actually acts out a faculty meeting, and then you talk to the actor in character. And the Department of Physics wanted to have it, but if any of you have been to Boston, we can have snow in April. So that, they had to reschedule, so they'll be having that soon. But then this is also something I want to highlight, is basically this program, again, was introduced by the BU WISE, and this is coming back to this theme of community, which I think is so important. So especially in the departments like physics, math, and statistics, where there aren't a lot of female faculty, we are very active in the process of hiring. When the candidate's coming to visit, we say, we will have an Arrows faculty meet with a candidate, completely off the record, just ask about the community. And so we resurrected this program. And just to show you the testimonials, which have been really great, is that this is a department chair telling me this in an email, which I then relayed to my Arrows faculty, showing them that their actions really has had impact. And we actually have 3 faculty coming as a result of this. And the faculty candidates, they comment on the importance of community as well. So this shows you, this is where we were at. In terms of for physics, you can see slightly better. You can see actually this number jumped, which I thought is promising, 2015, 20, it jumped 20, which I think is great. Also, we have this annual lecture that's done, again, that brings the entire community together. So we just had this last month, which was really great. This is actually President Brown talking, but you've got deans, associate deans, chairs, undergraduates in here, graduate students, so we were quite excited. We have this reception. This is the provost chilling with some undergrads here, talking with them. So it was really, really fantastic. And so Julie Chen, who you've heard her name today in terms of the sea change, is she talked about research as a team sport and how do you build a championship team. So what she was describing here is a field hockey team, how you have different people on the team. How do you form that in terms of your research centers and your departments? So this was a great engaging conversation where we had many different colleges, not just arts and sciences and engineering, but also like business and everything as well. So we're quite excited about this. So I just have a couple last slides here. This I really want to. This was Dr. Lori Leshen. She's the president of WPI, and at a GWISE luncheon, she said something that really stuck with me. And she said, so those of you know, in the Republic of Ireland from 1990 to 2011, they were women presidents, right? And so she told the story about her friend in Ireland whose son asked her and said, "Mommy, can a boy become president?" Right? So I think it's really interesting, right? It's the context, because his formative years, women were presidents. I mean, in the the U.S., we should be so lucky. Oh, anyway, we won't go there. So, but then the other thing I thought was really great, this is Katie Coleman, who is an astronaut. But what I thought was really interesting is she's a chemist and astronaut. And so as you can imagine, astronauts are constantly asked to talk to people. And she said, when her male colleague astronauts are asked, oh, when did you know you wanted to be an astronaut, right? This is, again, back to you can't be what you can't see. They all say, oh, yeah, I knew when I was 5 years old that I wanted to be an astronaut. And so, but she said she didn't even know she could be an astronaut until she saw Dr. Sally Ride. And I think she was in graduate school at that time. But fortunately, she saw that and she decided to be an astronaut, similarly to the Millie Dresselhaus commercial that Shirley talked about, and her 2-year-old granddaughter wants to be a scientist. So I think it's important to have this, to have the role models out there and visible, because you can't be what you can't see. And then finally, my last slide is why should you care? And I love this because I adapted this from Marie Wilson, founder and president of the White House Project. Again, Obama administration back then. So you are asked to lead a task force to solve, let's say, I don't know, clean water, sustainability, fill in the blank, right? But you say, oh, wait a minute, you cannot use half of the collected intelligence. And it's more if you include diversity, right? That's just ridiculous, right? So women are more than 50% of the population, but only 16 to 20% leadership positions. And as I showed you, it's even lower for STEM and academia. So we really need to work together, and I'm really very excited from everything I've heard at this conference. And so this is just to kind of show you we still have a lot of work to do, in these roadmaps, but I thank you for your attention, and we'll take any questions.
Thank you very much. Advance, recruit, retain, and organize women in STEM. I think that's brilliant. A lot of action words. There was one thing you said which I thought was really interesting. Yesterday, one of the last talks we had from Jean-Claude Worms, he said, no women, no money. And I think this is very interesting because this is a different approach, which was, in one of your slides, you wrote, retain talent to ensure long-term competitiveness. Yeah. And I think that's really crucial because if women start to leave different universities because others are actually catering for them appropriately, then universities are going to start realizing that they're losing talent and they might, start doing something really effective and more pushy about it. Yes. So I think that's interesting because yesterday we kind of finished with the whole idea of top down, no money, no women, no money. And here you're offering a different kind of best practice, which is think of it in a different way. So a very, very positive and engaging first talk.
I love that you bring that up because I think especially one of the holy grails, I think, is dual career couples, which is, again, why I use the physics example, because that's particularly a big problem in physics. But I think the institutions that figure out how to address that are really going to be the ones that are
competitive.
Yeah, and then it's just a matter of more of what's the cost of doing nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah.
We have time for a question. I rattled on a bit. Over here. If you could please state your name and affiliation.
Hi, I'm Hilde Janssens. I was a woman in STEM. I've been a trainer for a couple of years for women and male scientists. And now I've also been hired to take care of diversity and inclusion at the IST Austria, which is a brand new campus. They aim very high to be competitive with MIT and all of that. So I'm very interested in this because I'm also wondering, how the hell am I going to set up something there, right? Yeah. So this was very useful. Yeah. So my question to you is, this approach, right, you really compare it with project management and defining the stakeholders and the barriers and the accelerators. Could you recommend this for a smaller institute, like the IST is aiming to get to 1,000 people, so 90 research groups?
Oh, no, absolutely. I think it can be. I mean, it's an interesting thing for project management. You could scale it down even, to even smaller, let's say for like a startup company as well, too, right? So I think the challenge, right, that we were facing, right, is you didn't want people saying, oh, it's just another, woman thing, right? So you wanted to really engage, so the challenge was, how do you engage everybody? Right, and so when I was actually shocked that our president, I shouldn't be shocked. I mean, I was happy, right, that our president came as well, because it shows commitment, right, from all the way from the top, all the way to the bottom. We had undergraduates just thrilled, seeing, these kinds of activities, and so it's important to have a combination of the, of the gatherings, but also a clear work plan, right? Because what I didn't mention to you is I also, as many of you here too, I have an active research program and I'm also teaching, right? So the question is, as you say, how do you start something like this and really make it kind of an institutional change, right? On top of everything else you're doing, right? And so the challenge then is to have everybody, say, okay, I want to be a part of this. How can I help, right? So that's the idea behind that. So I think it absolutely would work, and I'd be happy to talk with you.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we have a round of applause for Professor Joyce Wong?